Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Great to have you with us. I'm Rick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies here at AEI. Today I have with me my friend and colleague, Tim Shriver, and the conversation is about the virtues of youth sports. We want to talk about why sports is important, how we get more kids more involved in sport, and what are some of the challenges we face as we try to do so. Tim is the chairman of the Special Olympics International Board of Directors. He's also the co-founder and chair of the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. And he's author of the New York Times bestseller, Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most, as well as a father of five. If there's somebody who I want to talk sports with, it's somebody who's actually a father of five. So Tim, let's start with this. We want to cover a lot of ground relating to youth sports and Special Olympics and the rest. This summer, the Special Olympics took place. I think for a lot of us, we see a little bit of it, we read about it a bit, and that's really all we know about the effort. Can you just give us some context on International Special Olympics? What's it involve? How many kids are we talking about? How many grown-ups? What's the deal?
Yeah, well, thank you, Rick, and thanks everybody for coming, and those that join online. I'm very grateful for the chance to talk with an audience like this that's so interested in policy and interested in research and interested in substantive work to make our schools better. It's been my life's work, and I've been honored to collaborate with Rick at times when he doesn't yell at me. We get along, and we've made some, I think, very important collaborative points about reform over the years. So I'm happy to be here. So the Special Olympics, it's a little bit confusing, and in some ways that's on us. So there are three pillars of the Olympic movement: the Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games, and the Special Olympics movement. All three are, in effect, almost separate organizations with aligned but separate missions. The Special Olympics movement was founded in the United States in 1968 as a movement to empower and originally to help deinstitutionalize children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The Paralympic movement and the Olympic movement share a common goal of having every 4 years big games. So their goal is to elevate the elite performers either with disability or not with disability. Our goal is to empower community-based sport for all ability levels, children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we like to say, in addition to having a big games every 2 years, our goal, pre-pandemic, we would have had 100,000 games a year. So people will sometimes say, oh, you work with Special Olympics, when is the next games? I mean, like in 9 minutes. Because, for instance, this weekend in DC or Maryland or Virginia, there will be a basketball tournament, and a swimming competition, and a fall games, and a county games, and unified games, and games for adults, and they'll all be going on, and every one of those we call Special Olympics. The athletes show up, they wear their uniforms, they say the oath, they compete in division to competition. So the model in the reason this is important, a little bit of background, is because our model is not an elimination model. We are not seeking, so if you say to me, who's the fastest person with Down syndrome who's 14 and under? I have a really good answer, I have no idea. We're not actually interested in who is the best. We're interested in what is your best. So if you run the 100 in 15 seconds, you will run against other people. It won't be running against Rick and me, you'll be running against people who run the 100 in 15 seconds. We're more likely to run the 100 in 30 seconds. So we would compete against each other. And if I beat Rick, I get a gold, he gets a silver. It's the same gold you get if you ran it in 15, and it's the same gold you get if you ran it in 40 or 60. The only goal we have is to match people according to their ability and their training capacity with like competition. So in some ways, what we saw in Paris, whether it's Simone Biles and her extraordinary achievements, or someone like Ali Truitt, who competed in the Paralympics after losing a portion of her leg in a shark attack, you see the best in the world in a particular category. We're interested in a much more horizontal view of sport and try to run games all over the world to bring that to life.
And so how big are the Special Olympics? How many
So we
kids?
have, our numbers are not exact, to be honest. You wouldn't put an auditor on them. Before the pandemic, we were at about 6 million athletes around the world, about 100,000 games a year. About 1 million of those athletes are people who don't have disability. They join us in what we call unified sport. So we'd be on the team together. Rick and I would be on a team with athletes who have intellectual challenges. We'd be playing soccer, let's say, competing against another team that has equal numbers of people with and without challenges on the team together. So we're in 190 countries. We have 1 million athletes in China, over 1 million athletes in India. We're in 30,000 schools, creating what we call these unified sports, so Special Olympics unified sports teams in schools around the world so that kids grow up. I mean, our vision, if I can get right to the end, our vision is that everyone in this room who went to a high school, 20 years from now, if you're in this room and you were in high school now, you'd be able to look back and say, we had a boys team in our school and a girls team in our school, and we had a Special Olympics unified team in our school. And our Special Olympics unified team won the state championship my sophomore year. The boys team came in second. So it would normalize the idea that participation in inclusive sport is a routine and expected part of the culture of the American high school. We'd like to see that all over the world.
I mean, part of the rationale for this is, you believe in the transformational power of sport.
That's right.
In the ways in which it impacts youth. Could you talk a little bit about that? What is it about sport that is so powerful?
Well, I'll give you two short answers. I will try to go short. The first is for people with intellectual disabilities. So let me take that subset of the answer. This is a community that is routinely reminded of their incapacity to perform to a normative level. Really almost from the time either they're born or from diagnosis. They're told your child is 2 standard deviations below the mean in this or that, or language or speech or motor activity, whatever it is. And these are children who are routinely made to feel lesser than in school. I wish I could say that's not true, but that's the fact. Sport is no longer about your disability, it's about your position. You're no longer a person with autism, you're the striker on the team. You're no longer a person with Down syndrome, you're playing point guard. The capacity to adopt a skill-based identity is enormously powerful for our community. And it has proven to be enormously powerful around the world for allowing people who don't have disability to see our community as gifted. The simplest way of putting this is sport emphasizes ability, not disability. So for our community, that's life-changing. It's absolutely transformative. If you look at the more normative patterns in sport, we see a huge number of issues. I mean, there's, anybody that's been to a sports banquet has heard a coach get up and say sports reveals character or sports develops character. It's true. Issues around teamwork, perspective taking and empathy and sharing are very powerfully learned in sport. Issues around resilience and grit and persistence. Issues around learning how to bounce back. Sport, everybody in sport, all you have to do is watch the Michael Jordan ad. He goes on, he says, I missed 12,686 shots or something like that, right? So everybody in sport knows, Roger Federer gave a talk last summer, I think it was at Dartmouth, where he said, I won 52% of the points I played in. So that means you lose 48% or something like that. Don't quote me on the numbers. But his point was, you gotta be able, if you're in sport, to lose a point and start the next point ready to go again. There's no carryover. So the capacity to let go of fear, of anxiety, of anger, of self-doubt. We have this exercise in social emotional learning called silencing the naysayer, and we teach this with a horse, because the horse is the naysayer. You get it? So how do you silence the naysayer? Sport is really good at that, when it's done well. It's really good at helping you say, okay, yeah, I missed that shot. I got to get back in position. I got to try again. So we see all that stuff. I like to think that sport, like that we learn, we tend to think of learning as a cognitive exercise, but it's also a physical exercise. Anybody here interested in early childhood will know that in early childhood, motor development and play and physical expression is a critical pathway for learning. Children don't learn early in childhood by putting things on a blackboard or on a PowerPoint slide. They learn by doing. And that doesn't stop when we get older. We still learn with our bodies. It's almost like learning with your body instead of with your mind. And those lessons just, for whatever reason, we don't have great science on this in my view, but those lessons tend to linger and become generalizable in some ways much more so than lessons learned simply in a more didactic setting.
So what does it take to build out Special Olympics in schools? What are the challenges? How much of it is there in the U.S.?
So, like I said, we have a vision. I think it's pretty clear. Does anybody here have kids at high school age? Yeah, okay. So I want everybody who's got a kid at high school age or who is at high school age or who is about to be ready to go to high school, I want you to be able to not have to undo the stereotype that sports champions are only people of elite ability. So how do you get this going? Our secret weapon is kids. We're a very low cost, you should be very happy about this, Rick. We're a very low cost intervention. I was in Oklahoma 2 weeks ago. The average school in Oklahoma, I visited 4, that has implemented a unified sports program in their school. The average cost was $1,500 for the first year. That's the most expensive year. Now, I will say, funnily enough, I was at the high school and I went up to one of the kids. They're in Unified PE, which is the place they train for the unified sports team. And I said, well, why did you join? And the young man said, well, I thought this was going to be boys and girls. That's what I thought unified was. So I'm like, I want to be in that PE class. But we get kids to organize, we get teachers, administrators, sometimes it's special educators who advocate for this. Sometimes it's parents. So there's a lot of different vectors for it, but the good news is it's not complicated, it's not cumbersome, it doesn't require huge amounts of training, it's not expensive, and it's high impact.
With the examples you mentioned, the striker, the point guard, these are obviously team sports.
Yeah.
Is the unified mostly about team sports, or?
It's both. We have unified track and field, and you can sort of combine your times. So if you and I were running unified track and field, and I ran in 22 seconds and you ran in 42 seconds, no offense.
That sounds about right.
That we'd combine our score and we can compete against you two running in. So you can make unified scores out of almost anything. The good news is when you do this in a school, the kids get it. Kids get it quickly. And not to be political, but they don't get it the same way they get things around some of the other campaigns that are trying to promote inclusion. What they get is the other kid deserves dignity. It's not an adversarial relationship between me versus you or boys versus girls or whatever. It's a community. Kids understand that my job, this one kid said to me, he's a 5th grader, he said last week, he said, oh, I want to do this because I want my friend Max, who has a disability, I want him to learn how to play football so that when he gets older, if someone asks him, he can play. And I said to him, oh, that's great. What has Max taught you? And he sort of paused for a second and he said, well, Max has taught me, he's helping me learn that everyone needs to help. Helping me learn that everyone needs to be a helper. So it's this sense in which the kids start to own the idea that bullying and name-calling and stigma aren't cool. It's just not cool. And when kids own that, the school shifts. We've talked a lot over the years about school culture as an outcome indicator for whether a school is performing well. Do kids feel safe in the school? Do kids feel like people care about them? Do they think their teachers value their capacity? Is it easy to make friends in my school? Those kinds of school culture indicators shift quite quickly when the kids own the change. So, we're very excited about the fact that so many young people want to start these teams in their schools. And then we train these young people as what we call inclusive leaders. So leadership in many respects is about command and control. It's about having a vision. It's about telling people what to do. It's about getting people to join you. Our vision of leadership is about how broad the circle you can make inclusive, right? How do you find a role so that not just, well, you're smart, yes, you're very good, very super smart, not so good over here, okay. No, we want leaders who can find a role for everybody. Everybody has a seat at the table, everybody's gift is valued.
I don't want to get pulled off the school sports program, but you just said something that struck me as real interesting. I want to just stay with it for a sec. You said that it's a way to approach inclusion that feels less political than some of the, and that's something that often resonates. Because I feel like one of the nice things about the sport conversation is that it pretty much blows by a lot of the partisan divides that we're all used to and frustrated by. What is it about talking about this in terms of sport, in terms of some of the more identity-focused interventions or what have you, that kind of helps it stay out of some of these familiar political lanes?
Well, I think, from the right, where there's, I'm going to try to characterize it, there's concern about creating adversarial cultures and a sense of humiliation for one group or another. We circumvent that. We're not actually interested in any of that. We're interested only in promoting relationships. And from the left, I think there's always a fear that people are going to be excluded, marginalized, who's going to be left out. And we're the most marginalized population, I hate to say it, because I'm not proud of it, but people with intellectual disabilities are the most marginalized population in every country, in every community, in every culture that I know of. So neither side feels threatened by the way I believe. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but so the question is not well, how great are we, but the question is, what could we learn from this? And I think, inviting young people to own treating each other with dignity. We've done this study of, like if you sorted kids here who were really, young men and women who were really good at including, we did about a 2-year-long study, qualitative data, and then a lit review on what we're now calling an inclusive mindset. What could we teach kids? We talk about growth mindsets and all these different things over the many years. What could we teach? What are the components of an includer? And what we find is they have higher degrees of empathy, they have higher degrees of cognitive perspective taking, they have a higher propensity to see everybody as having dignity, and they have a lot of courage. They're gutsy. They take chances with their own social capital for someone else. So what I think this model does is invites people to learn how to almost model those skills, because what we want, I think, from the progressive side is we want to remove the barriers, the injustices, the historic barriers, all that language that have excluded, marginalized, and continue to make it difficult for some groups by including everyone. So I think this concept of an inclusive mindset has some value, not just for our community, but for kids more broadly.
And on the sports thing more broadly, so when we start talking about one of the things that strikes me is what you're talking about for kids with special needs is broadly applicable.
Right.
That sport is a way to help people feel like they belong. It's helped to learn the kinds of traits that you were just talking about. But we also know that schools seem to have, been hollowed out in a lot of important ways over time, partly by response to the pandemic, that we've seen a reduction in sports opportunities. And second, there's been this tyranny of kind of the travel squad.
Right.
That, at earlier ages, kind of tweens and teens, we see this intense competition.
Right.
And huge drains on family resources and time. Curious, what can your work with the Special Olympics help us understand and help us see a way forward when it comes to making sure more kids have more opportunities to benefit
Well, the
from
news
sport?
is worse than that. If I were to say to you, everyone in this room, name 3 experiences from before you were 16 where you felt embarrassed and humiliated. My guess is everyone in the room, one of those experiences will be a sports-related experience. You couldn't climb the rope, you got picked last on the team, you dropped a fly ball, You got laughed at because you ran the wrong direction. The ball went through your legs and they scored a goal. And you remember this like from third grade or second. I mean, it's searing the number of humiliating experiences young kids find. And part of the outcome of that is, I was just looking at the data before we got here, 70% of children quit sport by the age of 14. So, and there's a lot of reasons, but the primary reason is that sport is telling you you suck. I mean, imagine a field where we have all this power of participation, all this value of inclusion, all this value of physical exercise, of nutrition, body image in particular for women and girls, sense of self-esteem that comes from being able to play and being rewarded for playing well and training and doing the best of your ability. And the entire infrastructure is actually designed to do the opposite, which is to sort you by the good and the bad and get rid of anybody who doesn't measure up. That's why you get this intense competition for the travel teams. That's why you get so much anger at the coaches who don't play your kid. They're not angry because the kid's not getting a chance. They're angry because the kid's not excelling and not going to be a star, as though my kid's going to go to, I don't know what, the NBA or a Division I school or get a scholarship or be famous. So I think we've really, the general sports world has really got it all upside down. It's set up, like I like to say, like a pyramid. It needs to be a circle. It needs to be a ball. And I think it's a complete paradigm shift where the goal should be for every child to play sport throughout the developmental window. They're really, now, I don't mean you should be forced to if you really hate it. I mean, it's just like math. If you hate math, you end up in the Gen Med math program and you're in the same class in 7th grade and then you're in the same one in 8th grade and you just can't stand it. I mean, that's probably a failure in some ways of adults, but nonetheless, the point here isn't to be an oppressive force experience, but I think if we thought of sport the way we think of reading, the way we think of the basics and that we want kids to learn no matter what their age, as long as they're in a school setting, if we thought of sport that way, after school you wouldn't have 12 kids going to the basketball team or 30 kids going to the soccer team. You'd have 1,300 kids going out to playing fields and participating. And that's what our athlete community, that's what the Special Olympics movement is trying to model back to people. You don't have to be the best to do your best. And you don't have to defeat someone else to win. You just have to try the best you can, give everything you've got. Now, I had a big discussion the other day with Michael Phelps and his wife, Nicole, about participant certificates. He's like, that's what's wrong with the country. I was like, Michael, you have 28 frickin' gold medals. Come on, stop it. But he made a really good point, which is we ought to reward people when they get better and when they do better. And that's true. That's why in Special Olympics, the oath is, let me win. That's the beginning of the oath. Let me win. But if I cannot win, let me be brave. So you're trying to hold two messages together. I want to compete. I want to try. I want to compete against people I have a chance to compete against. And if I don't win, I'm going to be brave in the attempt. I'm going to try again. That message, I think, is lost in the hyper-competitive vision that has infected, I think, youth sports and really hurts it doesn't help almost anybody.
I mean, especially when we look at the data in terms of youth isolation,
right,
fewer friends, less time spent interacting, more time social media. I mean, this stuff seems incredibly important. So what can we take from, say, the Special Olympics, 100,000 events, something every 9 minutes?
Yeah.
If we want schools, we want elementary schools, we want high schools to be places where both we still value and encourage participation in varsity sports, and we think it's important that people set a high bar, but we also want everybody to play sports.
Yeah.
How do we start to get from here to there?
Why is that so complicated? I mean, I want to ask the room that. I don't know. I have grandchildren now. They're in what we call in Special Olympics the Young Athletes Program. 6, one of my grandchildren is 6, the other's 3. Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. we go out to Montgomery County to the rec center, and there's about 30 kids, and they come, and they learn ball skills, and they learn running skills, and they learn coordination skills, and they learn how to play catch, teamwork skills. We play for an hour. We then go off on our little thing. We go to church and so on. And I come back and I turn on the TV and I watch the NFL in the afternoon. I mean, I don't see why that's so complicated. Like, why is it, like, I know my grandkids not going to the NFL, but I want him and her, in this case a little boy and a little girl, to have great recreational experiences, great social experiences, great team building experience. Surgeon General says that loneliness is an epidemic. It's a disease. It's more, is as corrosive as 2 packs of cigarettes. And we have almost half of our American 12th graders who report almost clinical levels of depression. My life doesn't matter, the future doesn't matter. Completely crushed by the pressure and the contempt and the toxins in the culture. And we could be inviting every one of them to come out. And, I mean, they could be going out with those 6-year-olds volunteering. I'm just telling you, I guarantee you, the mental health goes up. It can't help it. You can't help it. I mean, it's almost irresistible. So I don't know what the answer is to why we have lost what I feel is almost a clear goal, which is participation for everybody in play and sport. I think it's somehow, I'd almost go, it's like an enlightenment problem. We think everything that's important is like from the neck up. It's part of my argument on social emotional learning. Like the brain never goes to school by itself. It goes with a body. It goes with feelings. It goes with relationships. It goes with experience. It goes with nutrition. All those things are in the school. So you can choose to ignore them. You can choose to pretend they're not there, but they're all there. And the desire to play is there for kids. And for the life of me, I mean, I just don't buy the idea that it's too expensive. That's the excuse everybody always uses. We don't have the money. I get it. I know school districts are strapped. I understand that. And they're under-resourced in many respects. But we could do better.
On a related note, I'm kind of curious. My frustration frequently is it feels like not only are we not doing things which we could do, what you're talking about, but we've stopped doing things that we used to do.
Yeah.
I think there's, a lot of nervousness about litigation. There's safetyism.
Right.
I think there's some ideological stuff. So, huge numbers of schools no longer play dodgeball because it's a martial game. They no longer let kids play flag football or touch football at lunch because kids are touching one another, and that's problematic. Mm-hmm. Kids are kept off the monkey bars during the school day. They don't go outside if there's any raindrops. It feels in a lot of ways like we've created a culture which is intent on kind of protecting schools as institutions from litigation or from hassle, rather than making sure that we're looking at 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds as energetic, moving kind of. That's me. I'm curious where you'd push back, where we see it similarly.
Well, look, I think some of the protections are good. But I think, I'll give you an answer you would give me on social emotional learning. Ask the parents. I think if we explain to parents what dodgeball is, and the parent says, look, I'm scared for my kid, she's anxious or he's anxious or doesn't feel comfortable in these kinds of settings, let them opt out of dodgeball. I mean, if dodgeball is harmful to your kid, I don't want to tell the parent that the kid has to play dodgeball. I don't want to have the kid coming home at night crying because they got hit by the ball and never want to play again.
But give them the choice, you're saying.
We got to educate parents about the ways in which this stuff works. Engage them in the conversations. The same thing is true on the social emotional learning stuff. People said, well, progressive educators don't want parents in the school. That's BS. Conservative educators want parents in the school. Also smart, but it's both sides. If you want to do anything well in schools, bring the parents along and you'll be able to be successful. I mean, Jim Comer taught me this 35, 40 years ago, talking about race issues. Bring the parents in. So people like me shouldn't be telling you, hey, you can't litigate if your kid gets hurt in dodgeball, or alternatively, your kid has to play dodgeball. I should be inviting the parents to come in and say, this is our plan for the year. We'd like to have dodgeball, monkey bars, whatever else, flag football, tag, whatever the sports are. These are going to be organized during recess. Some things are going to be in the PE classes. Some things are going to be after school program. Ask questions. What scares you? What excites you? You had a bad experience in soccer as a kid. How can we make sure your daughter or your son doesn't have that experience? We want you in this conversation because we want your kids to love to play. Because we think they'll be better, happier, better students, which we know from the data, by the way, the kids that get involved in art, just the Special Olympics unified sports, they're better attendance rates, better academic achievement rates, better outcome rates for their grades and so on. So it's not like for us to sort of come in from Washington and say, you ought to play dodgeball or you can't play dodgeball. But I think that's for engaging communities.
I mean, one of the pieces of pushback that I've encountered sometimes is there are folks who say, look, sports are fine, but schools are about learning.
Yeah.
This is a distraction. This is a fascination with varsity football in Texas or basketball in Indiana.
Right.
The wrong way that school needs to be focused on what matters, and we're already spending too much time on recess. Kind of curious if you encounter that, how you respond to it.
I think everyone wants kids to perform well academically. The only question I have is what goes into making that outcome happen. And I don't see much evidence that more time on task, more skill and drill, more rigorous demands for academically based homework or discipline in schools, I don't see much evidence that that produces the gains people want. I see evidence that when kids find their purpose, when they feel safe, when they are excited, when they feel they matter, when they feel school matters to them, to their families, to their community, then they perform. So I'm like all for the outcome. I just want to know what works. So if it works to teach kids how to self-regulate, to help them have time on task, call it whatever the hell you want to call it. I call it social emotional learning. You want to call it something else, call it something else. But if it works, use it. And if it works to have kids be able to exercise and play and feel a sense of belonging and participation and excitement about coming to school so they can play, use it to help promote academic achievement. There really is, there's no either or in this. It's all both and the question about the amount of, like maybe they spend too much time on basketball in Indiana, I don't know. Maybe they spend too much time on football in Texas, I don't know. Get the balance right, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If there's too much time on varsity football, that's not a good reason not to include Special Olympics unified sports in the school. That's not a good reason not to expand unified PE. That's not a good reason not to promote the young athletes, children at the earliest stages playing together, because those things have good outcomes associated with them.
Now, you've touched on the SEL and the social emotional learning piece.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised, given that you're, chair of CASEL.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, one, how sports kind of overlay with kind of your interest in SEL, and then two, SEL has obviously become, very much caught up in political and partisan debates.
Right.
How do we think about that in terms of the implications for sport?
Yeah. Well, the main thing that I've come to believe from the sport perspective is that sport, in particular the Special Olympics unified sport model, has the capacity to teach very powerful social and emotional lessons. It has the capacity to teach resilience, it has the capacity to teach grit, it has the capacity to teach empathy, it has the capacity to teach dignity, it has the capacity to teach moral courage. Those would all be lumped in the social and emotional place. That's not just learning how to kick with your left foot or how to shoot a basket or how to get good posture on a sprint and stuff like that. These are not the athletic skills. These are the social, emotional, adaptive skills. Sport is a very powerful teacher of social and emotional skills, values, and attitudes. Almost everybody agrees with that. I'm not saying that's not controversial. Yeah. Even the people who just are obsessed with college or high school football in Texas, they're partly obsessed because they love their team, but they're also partly obsessed because they say, look at those kids. Look at what they're learning. Look how strong they are. Look how tough they are. Look look what great teammates they are. Look how they value each other. I mean, they're talking SEL. They're talking my language, right? They don't use my terminology, but I think it's the same point. So I think there are a number of very powerful social and emotional outcomes that are positively associated with sport. I think, on the other hand, all I can say, Rick, is I think politics has not been friendly to what works in schools. We founded CASTLE 30 years ago, and the pillar of CASTLE was we want to create an evidence-based field, which is why we end up, I'm coming from the progressive side, you from the conservative, but I don't have any problem with it. Data. I'm like, show me the data. If it's not working, I'm not in this to get elected. I'm not in this to prove my brand. I'm in this for kids, which is what every teacher is. I mean, every good teacher cares about, does it work for kids? So people want to attack SEL for, because it's politics. Very rarely does someone come up to me and say, I can't stand SEL because of your data. I can't stand SEL because of your outcomes. People will say, oh, I don't like this lesson on LGBTQ, or I don't like the fact that you have, some programs have sexuality education in 5th grade or something. I said, fine, don't use them. Doesn't work for your community, don't use it. So I think the politics has been a real irresponsibly used on both sides, to the detriment of children. And that's the part that makes me mad.
You and I have had this conversation about SEL for years now. And one of the things that, that I find, I think, you more frustrating than me because you've spent so much time and energy around this work. But there are values that, it is very easy for us to identify as, oh, yeah, we agree on these.
Yeah.
These are broadly appealing to parents and educators across the ideological spectrum.
Right.
We want kids who can self-regulate,
Right.
who are empathetic, who are responsible, who are respectful. I get that. But so on the sports thing in particular, so it feels to me, like you've said, that sports is kind of a natural laboratory for a lot of this stuff. I mean, this is what good coaches, the coaches we've idolized, have been doing forever.
That's right.
And in some ways, you're pulling that out and trying to say, how do we do that in other environments? But it also goes the other way. So this spring, I got curious at one point. I wound up writing a column mocking some of this stuff. Because there's folks out there,
not you, Rick, not you,
me, who are bringing SEL into sport, and they want to bring the stuff that I think drives some of us on the right. So there's tips on how do you use sport to talk about microaggression. And one of the great things I've always admired about sport is how it helps kids think in terms of position instead of racial or ethnic identity. But these are folks who are high-dollar consultants who go into school districts and say, oh, good, now you can use sports as a chance to talk about, the tips are, have kids sit down at the start of practice and let's talk about microaggressions and when are they offended. And it strikes me as importing, not drawing out the kinds of stuff that that resonates with me about what you're saying, but importing some of the more troubling stuff that's kind of flown under the SEL umbrella and bringing into sports in a way that I don't think.
Yeah, but Rick, you got to remember, so I have two questions. Does it work? Same question.
Okay.
Like if people have used this in communities that have felt the sting of racism or aggression or other forms of injustice, and where that's a high-level issue and where the consciousness is very attuned to it and where there's a lot of despair and depression as a function of it, and maybe because of the narrative, but maybe because of real experience, does it work? Does teaching kids to be able to recognize microaggressions, to be able to do something about them when they feel them, to be able to seek help if they're experiencing them, to be able to try to correct their own behavior if they're guilty of them? I just have a simple question, does it work? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the program you're talking about, but I just would ask, is there evidence that it works? If it doesn't work, I wouldn't do it. If it works, I'd do it.
And if there's no evidence?
I'd say you should get some. But I wouldn't go to scale with no evidence. I don't have any problem with creativity and innovation. But as a teacher, I taught the Civil War my own way. But I wouldn't tell everybody to teach it my way because I never measured the outcome. I have no randomized controlled trial. I have no control group that could say, hey, the way Tim taught is better than the way somebody else taught it. So it was the best I could do as a teacher. But you might have walked in and said, geez, Tim, you should do this and you should do that. That's what a lot of my supervisors did say. So, but if someone's got an idea and they're trying to do something creative, I'd say have at it. If the principal, the parents, the kids want it, and then hold yourself accountable for outcomes. And if it works, if kids get more depressed, this is the premise, right? Kids get more depressed, more discouraged, more angry, more hostile. I don't know. If that's the outcome, it's not working.
I think, and that's,
But I think, but just to be fair, I think that us in Washington finding, weaknesses in somebody else's concept is just, it's a game that helps us make points, but I'm not sure it helps schools get better. And I don't mean that we shouldn't call out poor performance when we see it, and I don't mean we shouldn't be held accountable as educators for criticism. I'm all for that. Yeah. But I think we really got to be aware of what actually will help schools get better, and finding things that are working, and finding people who are doing innovation, and finding things that aren't working, and encouraging people to change. I don't know any teacher who says, you know what, you've been doing this for 5 years and every year you get lousy results. And the teacher goes, oh, I want to do it again. No, the teacher's going to go, I don't know, any teacher doesn't go, well, what do you think I should do differently? I mean, it's just the way teaching is. I mean, has anybody here ever taught? That's what you do all day long. You're sitting there. I'm sitting in front of you guys. If you were my students and I start to see you all slumping over and pulling out your phones and getting distracted, I'm like, God damn it, I got to change what I'm doing.
But Tim, I think, and this is such an interesting part of this larger tension that you've been alluded to. I mean, because part of it is these aren't the folks who are actually doing the work, who are coming out and saying, oh, get into microaggressions or have your students stop and do a privilege walk.
So I would ignore them then.
Well, but what's happening is these are the folks who are being brought out as, these are advocacy organizations who don't have to do the work, who are telling others. Right. They're consultants who are coming in to do workshops. So I think part of the frustration that's bedeviled the SEL stuff is, again, so much of what you talk about in principle, I think resonates with me and a lot of folks who think of themselves as conservative. But some of what's being offered as practice or advice feels both evidence-free and removed from practice.
I completely agree that the quality of practice matters at the ultimate level. I mean, I had this argument with Checker Finn about 5 or 6 years ago. I can't remember where, at a conference in Baltimore. And he said, what you're describing is, I can't remember the number. How many teachers are there in the United States? I can't remember.
3.5 million.
3.5. He says, you want to retrain 3.5 million people to be better and more competent at this stuff. What are the chances of your succeeding? I said, I don't know. But I think our kids deserve it. I said, what did it take to put a man on the moon? It took 3.5 million people. They spent 10 years working together and they figured it out. Engineers, the best people in the world, had to figure it out. And we did it. And it's a beautiful tribute to the human imagination in the United States as a country and the power of engineering and science and creativity. I think we need the same thing for our kids. I mean, look, I agree with you. Sloppy practice is unacceptable. I'm not going to sit here and defend it. I'm not going to say there aren't microaggressions. And I'm not going to say there aren't children who have been marginalized, and I'm not going to say there isn't racism and all forms of exclusion. You're not going to get me to say that. Those things are real, and I think there's plenty of evidence to support it. The question is, what do we do about it? And in our view, I'm way off my topic here, by the way. In our view, the Special Olympics experience tells us what we do is empower kids to overcome these problems themselves by giving them the tools to heal their relationships themselves. And we don't have to tell them much more than that we want you to work together. We want you to play together. We want you to learn together. We want you to grow up together. We want you to build a more inclusive world. Kids will get that. And they will learn when given the chance, whether they've grown up with or are surrounded by in their adult communities people that have different views of different races and stuff like that. And they'll start to wonder and question it and be better at it. That's all we want. We want kids to get better than we are, and not in a way that demeans us, but makes our kids the inheritors of a more hopeful future than we've had. That's the American ideal, as far as I'm concerned. So, anyway, you got me way off topic.
No, you brought it back beautifully. Yeah. But it strikes me that kind of inclusive, kind of kid-driven practicality that you're talking about is different from a lot of what I see offered up as, strikes me as evidence-free kind of consulting and advocacy.
Look,
around how to do
you
this.
just already, you lost me when you say evidence-free. Done, finished, over, I'm out.
I love it.
Okay.
Let's open it up.
But it goes both ways. It goes both ways. If you've got evidence to support self-regulation or listening skills or values of responsibility, don't use it politically because you think you can defeat somebody of the other party by polemically finding one teacher, who has one page in their lesson plan that uses one word you don't like and then running against them. That's outrageous. Really, we ought to be in entities like this, we ought to be furious about the distortion of things that work for kids by political forces that could care less. I think that's outrageous. And I think we're all guilty of it, honestly. I'm just going to say, me too. I grew up in a political family. You can see how people use issues. And the only people that suffer are children. Everybody else gets paid. Scholars get paid, advocacy groups get paid, politicians get paid, the media gets paid, and kids suffer. That ought to piss us off as much as somebody doing evidence-free microaggression training.
I like it. I like it. That was lit, man. That was good. Hey, and for those of you watching who want to share questions,
Please delete this if you're watching.
we're at hashtag AEI School Sports. Hashtag AEI School Sports. Anna, you go ahead and feed us the questions, please.
Oh, yes, sure. I'm representing the online community. So this is from someone who's a former varsity quarterback and point guard. He found his school identity in high school through sports. School athletics are being watered down, which is why travel sports are in high demand. I don't hear this argument regarding band, orchestra, school plays, glee club, debate, etc. Do you think sports should be the only extracurricular activity that should be all inclusive?
No. I wish I played an instrument. I don't play an instrument. I started in 7th grade with the sax, and I took 2 lessons, and I couldn't quite get it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're not so good. You don't need you in the band anymore," and it's that's the end of that. And every time I see a sax player, I think to myself, "Damn it! I wish I'd stayed with it just long enough so that I could go home once in a while, and hear the music." So no, I don't think, I think we should have the same argument around music. Music is an enormous unifier. It's an enormous source of joy and rest and peace and inspiration to people. Why do we say that there's only 5 kids should be able to play, or 10 kids should play the tuba in the school? No. It's a really good question. Never thought of it. But I think the answer is, I don't think we should water anything down. If you were a quarterback and you were a star shortstop or you were a point guard and it made it for you because you had to put everything you had. That's what Michael Phelps said. He's got a picture of himself winning the race by 1/100th of a second. And he said, "You know what that takes?" I said, "Yeah." Well, I don't, but I can't tell you how much I admire it. I mean, the results speak for themselves. One of the most famous athletes in the history of sports. Fan-frickin-tastic. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't swim.
Well, you've made this point to me before, Tim, that in academics, whether or not somebody's particularly good at it, there's kind of an expectation that we want you to keep at it, at least until you're 18.
Yeah.
But particularly in sport, which should be such a big part of any youth's life, but also in these other activities, debate and music.
Yeah.
There's an expectation that unless you're pretty good, a lot of kids are just going to kind of fall off along the way.
Yeah. I think it's a big mistake. I think we got it wrong. I think we ought to be promoting participation in all these things. Now, of course, not all kids can do everything. If I'm going to learn to play the sax, maybe I don't have time to play soccer too, and I don't have time to join the debate club. That's reality. But I think we ought to have a mentality that says we want every kid involved.
But I think also the marker that what I hear you saying, and because I think the question raises it, is I hear you saying that this should not come at the expense of varsity sports, that we still think
Yeah,
that stuff
no.
is absolutely important and
Absolutely
it's not
important
an
and
either
should be rewarded and celebrated. And you know, normative excellence is a great thing to watch. It's a great thing to see. It's great. It's inspiring. I mean, who didn't? If you watched the Olympics, you were. I mean, I was. It's like it's staggeringly beautiful and just, and extraordinary achievements of human beings are like extraordinary. I mean, like it's fantastic. But I'll tell you, if you watch a Special Olympics athlete who's 12 years old and who's had nothing, no friends, no birthday parties, no teachers who wanted them, no neighborhood organization, no role in the faith-based community, and you watch them run 100 meters, you're going to go, holy shit, excuse my French, that's a great athlete. And no disrespect to Michael Phelps or Simone Biles or the person who asked the question, but how about a little respect for her? Because the guts that she has to go to the starting line and run that race is just as staggering, in my view. Because almost no one we talk to has had to deal with what she's had to deal with and take a chance again on us. No one's been laughed at as much as she has. No one's been left out as much as she has. And yet she goes back to the goddamn starting line and runs her race. So I'm not going to apologize to anybody for giving her a chance because she deserves it. And what she shows the world is just as important as what great athletes show the world. And by the way, every great athlete I know says the same thing. Michael Phelps' foundation is dedicated, guess what, to Special Olympics. Because he wants to see our athletes be able to prove that they're great too.
Anna, please introduce yourself by name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Emily Samos, and I am doing work with the Campaign for Great Little Reading. And first I have to say, Tim Shriver, I can't believe you're a grandfather. I feel like you're just as, I remember seeing you speak 20 plus years ago with AmeriCorps, and you're just as inspiring today. And I'm really appreciative of this conversation. I will share, like I said, I do work with the Campaign for Great Little Reading. You probably all know we have weekly webinars. We had one back in July with Castle where we focused on the connection between SEL and literacy, early literacy. And then now I just had a call this morning with Andy Rotherham. We're going to do a follow-up, and we're thinking about this combination of the sports and SEL, but and I really appreciate, Rick, your questions, because we live in a little bubble in Washington, D.C., where nobody has a problem saying social emotional learning, and we work with communities all over the country where they can't say social emotional learning. Yeah. So I'm curious, I have sort of a multifaceted question here, but so the first question is, what is the language you use? Because sports is so, prolific, it's everywhere. But everything you're saying is so important about the connection between SEL and sports. But how do you make sure you're using terminology that can be heard and people aren't afraid of indoctrination or whatever else they might be afraid of? And then how do you create that through line from what schools are concerned about, like the webinar we had where it was focused on literacy, the connection between literacy and SEL, and then the sports and SEL. You know what I mean? Like, so how do you make that through line, and then how do you use the right language that makes sure everybody can hear it?
So I mean, it's a super complicated question. I'm not sure I have a simple answer. Look, I think the main through line, again, I'll go back to one of my mentors, Jim Comer, who said the basic science, educators don't have a basic science. And he is a medical doctor, said, in medicine, the basic science is anatomy. Everybody knows anatomy. And when you get in trouble, you rely on anatomy. Educators need a basic science, and to me, and to him, I'm just parroting his message, the basic science ought to be child development. So what are the developmental needs children have? How do teachers, parents, administrators, coaches, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, how are they marshaled together as a community to support the developmental needs of children? So the answer to that, what do children need developmentally? They need cognitive supports, they need social supports, they need emotional supports. They need that. I mean, it's not an argument. I mean, I don't care what you want to call it, they need that, right? So that's developmental basics. That's what human beings need. And the ways in which schools marshal their resources to do that at a high quality level is what we tried to build into the idea of social emotional learning. So let's not just take it for granted that the social and emotional needs are going to be met because they're critical to the academic or cognitive learning needs. So the answer at a basic level is development matters. It's the basic requirement of schools is to help children develop. That's why we have a first grade and then a second grade, because you're developing, right? And so whatever you can use to help children grow and develop academically will require the use of their bodies, the use of their hearts, and the use of their relationships. It's just a fact. So I can't tell you whether every school should have a kickball program or a dodgeball program. It's not my business. How could I possibly know? But I can tell you that to have children have the capacity to play, and in particular in this day and age, to play inclusively, is critical to the future of the country. Because if we don't solve this inclusion problem, we're not going to make it. And if Republicans and Democrats don't learn a language that allows them to treat each other with dignity, we're done. We're lonely, we're angry, we're scared, we've given up on the country because people like Rick and Tim have not learned to talk to each other. And for me, I learned the basics of that from watching Special Olympics athletes. So I want to have other kids have the same chance. I want them to learn what I feel privileged to have been able to learn, which is you can treat anybody with dignity, and when you do, watch out how beautiful human beings can be. So I can't tell you whether you should say this in music class, or this on sports, or this on PE, or this on literacy. All I can say is that the basic science of development tells us all these things matter, all the time. And that's, if we take that seriously, we'll do a lot better for our kids.
Anna, we'll have time for one more question.
Okay, I'm going to take another one from the online community then.
Hope it's easier than the last one.
Have endeavors such as higher level sports at collegiate or professional level come to overshadow the virtues of youth sports?
The money has followed the money, and you'll see the gigantic explosion in the lucrative nature of collegiate and professional sports has overshadowed the importance of sport. And I don't think many of the leagues, I'm going to say this as an invitation, I don't think many of the leagues have taken seriously their responsibilities to build a pipeline of children who aren't going to play in the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball or hockey or anything else. 99% of us aren't. And so what do these icons of sport, what is their role, what is their responsibility to ensure that everyone else gets to see and feel a part of these sports experiences? I think we have to take much more seriously than we have. So I think there's a lot of money that's been sucked up into those situations. That's because we like to watch. And they've done a great job with television. More power to them. Just if you're serious about the power of sport, take seriously what that money should be marshaled to help create.
Well, in fact, I mean, it strikes me that, like, on the changing media landscape and the business pressures, I mean, it's actively going the opposite direction. Major League Baseball has gutted the minor leagues.
That's right.
Which has huge impacts on, like, kids' ability to go to games in so many communities.
Right.
We've seen Division I colleges play this game of musical chairs in a way that has increasingly narrowed and concentrated kind of the ability to engage in sport in so many states. And so what you're pointing out is, I think, that problem at the elite level is becoming worse. It's more concentrated, it's more money.
Yeah. I think that's a real concern. It's not something I'm an expert on, but I think it's a real concern, and I think we ought to really pay close attention to it. I'm just going to close by saying that in 1984, I was working in the New Haven Public Schools, strong, very passionate, liberal, angry at Washington, that's the Reagan administration, for cutting funds to our schools, cutting funds for our after-school programs, cutting funds. I was so mad. And then I got a call from my mother that President Reagan has offered her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I was like, Reagan? I'm saying this here because I know everybody worships Reagan. I was like, no, that can't be true. It can't be Ronald Reagan that's giving you the Presidential Medal, the highest civilian honor in the country. Anyway, it was it was a good lesson that if we listen to each other across these boundaries, it was a great experience for my mom to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Reagan. She thought, kind of had a little crush on him, to be honest. But the point of the story is just to say that this movement has been welcomed by all communities in this country for 50 plus years. Every president, really since President Ford, has welcomed Special Olympics athletes to the White House, to the Oval Office, dinners, celebrations. And that's true of governors, that's true of mayors around the country, red and blue alike. It's true of Rotarians and Lions. It's true of people of faith and people of no faith. So it's worth looking at what these athletes, these Special Olympics athletes, can teach us. And it's worth thinking about how we expand their influence in our schools. That's what we're thinking about. How do we expand the influence of those kids that take the short bus, you call it what you want, or down the other end of the hall, or in the special ed wing, who everybody's sort of happy someone's being nice to them, but no one takes seriously. Our message is, take them seriously. They got gifts to offer their peers, gifts to offer their communities, they've got gifts to offer the country. Play unified, play together. Watch how quickly we learn how to grow and learn and live together more effectively.
Tim, I mean, this is such a heartening topic.
Thanks.
You guys do such incredible work on this. Appreciate you making the time. It's, you know, it's such a good reminder that there is so much that, you know, we can talk about and work together on that just doesn't exist within these tribal affiliations.
That's right.
And I also appreciate that on some of this stuff where, you know, we're going to have good faith differences, just, you know, your willingness to kind of frankly engage.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is how we can and should deal with kind of the real issues. So thanks again for being such a thought leader in this. Thanks for coming out and making the time today. And just really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rick.